Wise Child by Monica Furlong, Chapter 16, Summertime. After Beltane I was full of questions. When the man in the gold cloak summoned me to the stone and I spoke the words I began, I wondered, does it mean that I am special? How do you mean? How do you mean? Asked Juniper. There were lots of other children there, but he didn't summon them. Why did he summon me? Somebody had to do it. Why not you? She was being very dense. But I felt as if I was the right person. Yes, you were the right person then. At other times, other people are the right person for something. So it doesn't mean I'm special. Everyone is special. It doesn't mean I am bound to become a Doran or anything. Juniper didn't answer this time, but went on stirring the soup as if I hadn't spoken. I want to be special, I said obstinately at last. So does everyone else. So we have to take turns. Some people are more special than others, aren't they? Juniper suddenly got extremely irritated. The really special ones are the ones who don't even think about it, she said. I knew better than to pursue any further. As the weeks and months had gone by, the herbs that had once bored me had begun to interest me more and more. I loved the circular garden with the rows of spicy, sweet-smelling plants. I had fallen into Juniper's habit of idly picking a leaf and breathing the smell of lemon or aniseed, peppermint or sage. I knew now the common currency of our trade, the simple remedies of marigold and comfrey, peppermint and plum, the cures for cracked skin, the wounds for indigestion and consumption, Slowly, without too much encouragement from Juniper, I was beginning to learn about the drugs that relieve terrible pain, those dark, dusty, and dangerous drugs that grow against the stone wall of the garden, and were for people desperately ill, or for people who needed to sleep while smashed bones were repaired. I do not know why they interested me so much, but from the time Juniper first told me about them I learned their names and their properties, watched carefully to see how they were harvested and kept, read about them with difficulty in Juniper's big books. My curiosity about them made me a better scholar. Very gradually, Juniper had fallen into the habit of taking me with her when she went to visit the sick people in the village. What had once seemed so repulsive had gradually become intensely interesting to me. Sometimes we would discuss all the way home which herbs might help a skin disease, or cause an infant croup, or a case of infant croup. It astonished me that Juniper listened to my ideas as if I was a master of it all as she was. Why do you listen to me? I asked once, as if I knew something. You have a feeling for the herbs, she said. Her own feeling was of a slightly different kind. Although she knew and loved the herbs, it was as if her touch itself was the healing power. I saw people in great pain grow suddenly quiet and peaceful as she placed her hands upon them. When we went to Cormac's nowadays, I heated the bowls for the poultice and helped apply it. Cormac and I both believed that some love, some power in Juniper was what made the new red skin grow on his devastated face. What is it that you do? I asked her once. Try to get out of the way of the power, she replied. Occasionally I went to visit Cormac in place of her. We were friends now. Does Phelan ever visit you? I asked him once curiously. Once or twice a year, he told me, but he did not look forward to the visit with any pleasure, since Phelan told him that his illness was his own fault. Many years before, he and Phelan had been loving brothers. Cormac, the younger, had been a fine, handsome man, whereas Phelan was small and plain. Phelan had gone to the monks to study for the priesthood, while Cormac had become a soldier. As a soldier, he had fallen in love with the young and beautiful wife of an elderly courier. She had been married, as many young and beautiful women were, without her wish or consent. For a while, Cormac and she had kept their love secret. Then the courtier had found out, and Cormac had had difficulty escaping with his life. Within 3 months, the dread signs of leprosy had appeared. Phelan had turned against Cormac. How can you bear it? I asked. I meant living alone, shut away from the village, as well as the hateful disease itself. I have become a hermit from choice, he replied. To begin with, I hated it and I wanted to die. Now I have come to prefer it, the space, the silence, being alone with the plants and the birds in the great sky. But I still need love, yours and Juniper's. I was struggling with a Latin translation one day, while Juniper was out on some long, unexplained ramble of her own, perhaps on the seashore, perhaps to the mountains. She needed to be alone from time to time, when a hand rapped long and hard at the white door. Glad of the interruption, I jumped up and opened it, to find Ranald from the village, his face full of trouble. "Where's Juniper?" "Not here. We need her. Whitloff's had an accident." Whitloff was a Northumbrian who worked as a farm labourer in the village. We suspected he had come north to escape the consequences of some crime he had committed. "He fell off the cart, and the wheel has gone right over him. I doubt he'll live. I don't know when Juniper will be back. Maybe not till evening." Ranald looked at me doubtfully. "Could you come? You must know something by now." I felt a lurch of panic inside me. "Molly has done everything she can." Molly was the midwife, the layer out of the dead, the one who was the first on the scene when anyone in the village was ill or had an accident. "You probably can't make it any worse." I remembered my reading, the effect of the dangerous belladonna when mixed carefully with other sulphuric herbs. I might at least lessen Whitloff's pain. "I'll come," I said. I put a flask or two in a basket and some herbs that might staunch bleeding, put on my cloak and followed Ranald. Whitloff usually lived in a sort of shed at a farm on the outskirts of the village. After the accident, however, they had carried him into the farm kitchen, an enormous whitewashed room with a vast fireplace. They had laid him in the gentle warmth of the hearth, surrounded, ironically it seemed to be now, by the steaming kettles, the newly baked bread, and all the symbols of life. Soon after Ranald and I reached the track leading to the farmhouse, I heard the most extraordinary sound. A cat, I thought it must be at first. When I realized what it was, I stood stock still, rigid with shock. What I could hear was a man screaming and screaming, a terrible high sound that congealed in my ears. I did not want to go on. Ranald, however, took my elbow and led me forward through the knot of farm workers. Something must be done for Whitloff, stranger as he was, and I was the only person around to do it. The terrible injury was hidden by a blanket. The wheel had sliced across his thigh, so all I saw at first was Whitloff's pale, ghastly face under his thatch of yellow hair, and his glittering blue eyes searching desperately for help. The sight of a little girl could not, I thought, give him much feeling of hope. I knelt beside him and put my hand against his cheek, in the way I had often seen Juniper do to people. "I know the pain is bad," I said to him in English, "but I am going to give you something to ease it. It won't take long." And I gave him the draught. I took his hand and sat beside him, and almost at once the screaming shrank to a sobbing, and the sobbing in turn became an enormous sigh. I could feel his tormented body relax. "Well, look at that," said Ranald. "Holy Saint Bride," said the farmer's wife, crossing herself. Molly, who had been stirring some mixture over the fire, looked venomously at me. Soon Whitloff fell asleep, and one by one the ring of spectators crept back to their jobs in the barn or in the fields. The farmer's wife started making pastry, her enormous arms covered with flour. While Whitloff slept, I drew back the blanket and covered the great wound with leaves, but I knew that Whitloff would die. It was nearly dark when he suddenly opened his eyes. We were alone at the time, and he fixed me with his gaze. His speech was slurred, but I understood him. "Priest, great wrong. Don't want to be damned," he said. When Phelan arrived, I slipped past him and out into the storeroom that stood behind the kitchen. I heard their voices rising and falling for a while. At one point I peeped through the door, and Phelan, wearing a stole, was touching Whitloff with the holy oils. At another moment he was making the sign of the cross over him, his face grave, absorbed. The firelight behind him made a sort of aureole of his sandy hair, and he looked like a saint in carving. He passed me on the way out. "What are you doing here?" he asked sternly. "They sent for Juniper," I said, stammering. She was away, so I came." "She's bringing you up on her own path, is she? Spells and potions." I hung my head. "I am a Christian, sir." "We shall see." Whitloff died, very quietly, within the hour, as if all the pain had gone from both his body and his mind. I was very tired as I climbed the cliff. I seemed to ache all over, but then there was the peace of the big room and the cats and Juniper's lap, and at last I could be a little girl again. You did well, said Juniper. You were very brave. Although it was a summer evening, it was cool, and Juniper had lit a small fire of driftwood. Wasn't it lucky I knew all about the herbs? Very lucky. The herbs really work, don't they? Except that, I don't know. I thought the pain began to get better when I talked to him and held his hand, but then he was still very frightened in a way that only Phelan could help with him. I don't like Phelan, but he made Whitlaw feel peaceful. It's not one thing that takes away the pain. Sometimes it's herbs. Sometimes it's having someone take your hand. Sometimes it's telling somebody something wrong you have done and letting them take the weight of it away from you. Whitlaw needed both of you. But I'm only a child. You knew what you were doing, and you cared about him. Those were the important things. Phelan cared, too, so that also helped. He was awfully nasty to me. Being a friend of mine can make life difficult. I am sorry about that. I want to be both a Christian and a Doran. I see no problem in that, but Phelan may. And that's the end of chapter 16.